Welcome to Liddypod, Beatles banter with Bedford and Beesley.
Dave, here we are with, I think this is Liddypod 24, if I'm not mistaken.
It certainly is, and my dog has just entered the room just to confirm that. Roxy, is this episode 24? You sound a bit rough. Yeah, episode 24. Yeah, it's a great response to the competition for the Bill Zsigmond book. So we'll be sending out the winners, details soon. But of course, the big event is, of course, I went to see a Frankie Valli tribute band last night.
Dave, you tease us. We know what the big event is.
Yeah, well, I did actually, and they were very good. But now this whole thing, time for Thanksgiving weekend in America, is the Get Back series. Peter Jackson's epic of how to take, 60 hours film footage, 150 hours of audio, and put that into a little 3-part series. When I say little, I mean it's 6 and a bit hours. But we've been waiting for this for decades.
Yeah, this is the thing, isn't it, Dave? Because, it's like every so often something comes along, doesn't it, where you think, well, I thought everything had been discovered. A piece of memorabilia comes about, somebody's drumsticks or whatever, it doesn't matter. And you think, well, everything's been discovered. And it probably hasn't. And in a sense, this is similar on a much, much bigger scale, isn't it?
Well, it is. We had the excitement of a few years back of 8 days a week, which for me was an anticlimax. I think there was a missed opportunity. So just thinking, is this going to be contrived? Because obviously there's only Paul and Ringo left. Is it going to be a bit revisionist, which the Beatles have been known to do in the past? Or is there genuinely going to be something new in here? And overall, I've got to say, thoroughly enjoyed it. There's so much in there, and that there was so much to learn just from those interactions. So overall, they've done a very, very good job with this.
Now, I have done a very good job, but it would be very remiss of us, Dave, and especially the Beatles detective that you are, to not get out, first of all, the couple of chronological errors at the start. So just take people through that. We're not criticising it. We're just saying, come on, this could have been better.
You may not be criticising it, but I am. Oh, I tell you what. So you've got to have context at the start. That's fair enough, because this whole event of Get Back takes place in January 1969, which is towards the end of their career. So you've got to set that up. And it's almost like it was an afterthought. So you start with the Quarrymen song, In Spite of All the Danger, recorded in July 1958. Liverpool Docks, and it tells you it's 1956. Then you see John with the Quarrymen in 1957. And then you have Paul McCartney, age 14, joins the Quarrymen. Well, no, he was 15. That's not a tricky thing to work out. And then 13-year-old George joins. No, he was 14. It's simple, very, very basic stuff. I think, why can't you get that right? And then the annoyances. I'm on my soapbox now, so you've been warned.
You go for it, Dave. You go for it.
So then they're talking about when Brian discovers the Beatles. So it's like, the Beatles played after Hamburg, played at the Cavern many times. So then you see the footage of John, Paul, George and Ringo from August 1962 playing at the Cavern, which, fair enough, that's the only footage we've got. But then it says Brian discovers the Beatles at the Cavern. Well, no, he discovered them. He went there in November 1961 when it's John, Paul, George and Pete. And we're almost 12 months later when the only footage of the Beatles playing with Ringo is being shown. That's completely wrong. And think, why can't you get the simple stuff like that right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna spend that long, it's taken a long, long time, and it fundamentally, I think that one single fundamental error was made at the very start with the very first date, and everything followed from there. It was almost like everything then became a year out of synchronization because of that date. But you're absolutely right, Dave. If you're it almost felt like they just tagged that on at the start to say, "Oh, we better contextualize the story that we're telling." When in fact, that was right to do, but once you get the wrong date first time round, then everything else follows. That everything else is going to be wrong after that, doesn't it?
Yeah. And that's the problem. And, you know, because Paul's going to be heavily involved with the production of this, you know, he and Ringo down as producers. Surely he, when he sees that, says, "You've got that wrong. I was a year older than that." So what have they seen?
It's almost like the bit that was so obvious that they didn't bother checking it, if you know what I mean, really. But anyway, we got that one out of the open, Dave, you know, because I know it will annoy and has already annoyed people. I got WhatsApp messages within about 10 minutes of it being shown from fellow tour guides to say, what's going on? Fortunately, it didn't continue, did it? It got much better.
Well, thankfully, once they dealt with that stuff, you then got into, you know, how the whole session started. And again, that was interesting of them showing the Hey Jude video. And they'd done that at Twickenham Studios. And that's the first time they performed in front of an audience. Because obviously Eddie comes and joins them on the stage. And I think they quite liked that idea. They must have missed that. Because from giving up touring in August 66, it's quite a gap. You know, you've gone over 2 years. And Paul references this later on, that when they're talking about doing a live performance, they're a bit nervous. And you can understand that, of they haven't performed together in front of an audience since August 66. So you can see that's sort of, it's a nice idea because you're a band. That's what you want to do. So that's how it sets it up. They come up with this idea to have the sessions in Twickenham Studios where they'd just done the Hey Jude and do a rehearsal. And the plan is then get these new songs together, learn them, and then perform them live. And that becomes the album. So you get the TV show of watching them, how they're doing all that. Get up with the new songs, and then possibly at the beginning saying, look, maybe doing 2 live shows. They look at different options of how they're going to do that. So in theory, it's a really good idea. But straight away you can see it's a bit awkward because they're in this huge TV studio, gathered together in a small area, but there's cameras and microphones everywhere.
I mean, I was about to say, I mean, a couple of things. Their music had become more sophisticated in that period since they'd stopped touring and stopped performing live. So replicating that in a live context was obviously going to be more difficult. And also, you know, that sort of slightly, not awkward, but you know, we see so many fly on the wall type filming these days, don't we? That it's part of the way of life. But in those days, you know, they were brought together with the intention of doing live performances with all these cameras around them. No matter how many or how few there would have been, they were conscious of that. And as big as they were, the pressure must have been quite amazing, really.
Well, I think that's it. And maybe they were feeling that they had to do something different. Because, again, you know, they have that conversation, you know, this is what we do. We record albums. We don't perform anymore. So it would be nice if we can work on these songs together on the basis of, not that we can get in an orchestra here and all these other complex recording techniques. We've got to be able to learn them, but between the 4 of us, perform them live as well. And that's a different way of thinking to the way they had been. The way, you know, the recordings got so complex that with the technology then, they would have been impossible to perform. So they've come up with, you know, a good format, which is almost taking them back to basics. And it's interesting, a number of times they reference Hamburg of, you know, that's where they learned their tradecraft really, on stage, live, in front of an audience. And I think that's what they were wanting, because by the end of their career, you know, they'd done Shea Stadium, been stuck out in the middle of this field, away from all the crowds. And what they were thinking of was, they even say, maybe we do it at the Cavern. They wanted that intimacy with a crowd again, but were nervous of an intimacy with a crowd again. And There's a lot of pressure on them to do that, and in such a short space of time, to come up with 10, 14 songs, which they've learned together and know well enough to perform.
Yeah, and, it would have been interesting, not that we will ever be able to get this, but it would have been interesting to compare and contrast how that process would have taken place in the very early days, when they were writing their songs and performing them live almost within days of, and it's, the complexity of the songs was obviously a factor, but it would have been really interesting to see how that changed. And you're absolutely right, Dave. The hairs on my back of my neck stood up when Paul said, maybe he was slightly tongue-in-cheek, I don't know, he might not have been, but when he said, maybe we should do this at the Cavern. And can you imagine if they had?
Well, of course, Paul lived that, didn't he, when he came back in 99. But I think that was one thing they always wanted to do, and George Martin wanted to do, of course, when they're doing the first album. Could they but the acoustics were awful. But I think that's what they wanted. I think it's no surprise once Paul starts Wings, the first thing he wants to do, lob everything in a van and go round very small places and play. Because I think they just lost touch so much with an audience that you think, well, do we just sit around for days and months on end and make records? When really, for most musicians, what they want to be doing is playing.
Yeah, and I'm not a musician, but most musicians start out. Being a musician is a performance craft, isn't it? Really, and whilst ultimately you want people to listen to you, and everybody's not going to see you live, but that's where you begin, isn't it? And that's where the feeling and the vibe from the audience comes from. You can't feel that feeling and vibe from someone listening on a record or streaming the song today as bands do. It's all about that live thing, isn't it? Really. And do you think, Dave, in a sense, did you get the sense from them that they regretted either stopping performing or regretted the idea that they were going to go back to do some live songs?
I don't think they regretted stopping when they did. By then, in 66, they were bored because, still, they're doing, 30, 35 minutes? They're used to doing hours and hours on stage and doing the same songs over and over again, just in a different city. All the screaming, all that kind of stuff. The fun had gone out of it. You'd had all the stuff which, of course, they mentioned there with the John's, Beatles more popular than Jesus stuff going on. They'd had the awful time in Manila when they were lucky to get out of the place alive. I'm thinking, why are we doing this? And apparently, after the Candlestick Park one, their last gig, George said, right, that's it, I'm not a Beatle anymore. Because he equates being a Beatle with playing live. And they become a studio band. But I think they just lost the enjoyment of being a musician. And because if you're writing songs, the whole thing is you want to perform them for other people to enjoy. And they couldn't do that. And so they were trying to find something different and more creative, but have that pressure. And I think that was the thing which told a few times, the pressure to do it in such a short space of time. That got to them. And that's when the arguments and the niggles started and the tension sort of bubbled up a bit.
The tension in some of those scenes is palpable, isn't it? It's almost a bit cringy, really. You could feel the tension between them, and you could almost see at any moment, any one of them could just put their instrument down and say, I'm not doing this. The tension was immense, wasn't it?
Well, and of course that is what happened. And you could see that Paul's the one who's driving it forward, and he mentions a few times, we need somebody here who says, right, you've got to be in for 9 o'clock and we're going to do this and this. We've got to be methodical. We've got to set ourselves targets. And because there was no manager there to do it, he's the one who's trying to drive them forward. But that's not easy to do if you're within a group. And he has that discussion, that John was always the leader of the group. But John was very distracted with Yoko. He was never the most punctual, didn't like mornings. And so they'd wander in at different times of the day. and it would just be chaotic. But on the other hand, there were times when you could see they're getting frustrated, and they just start jamming a song that they used to do years and years ago, and then suddenly you saw the fun, them enjoying themselves doing some of the old rock and roll songs. And you thought, there's that buzz. That's what they were looking to recreate. And I think that was great, just letting them do that. And they're getting the fun bit of when they used to perform live with some of these songs.
I think you're absolutely spot on with that, Dave. And I remember, you probably saw this yourself, I remember many years ago in the early 80s when Abbey Road Studios opened up for visitors, and they produced a film of the Beatles playing Abbey Road. And the one thing, we went down as a group of tour guides, and I remember coming out and everyone saying, wow, that was fantastic. But in the whole footage that they showed, there was no footage of them having a laugh. Yeah. And, you put 4 Liverpool lads together, there's going to be creative tensions, but they're going to have a laugh. And there was none of that there. And I think in this, certainly in the first episode to Get Back, it was almost like that joy had gone out of it. But it was only when they actually reverted back to something they'd done a long time ago. You could actually see them sort of, the shoulders dropped, they smiled, they had fun.
Yeah, and, they start clowning around and doing silly voices. And one of the nice bits was there's a number of songs which are original Lennon-McCartney ones from when they started writing songs together, which we've never heard before. And it's amazing that they can remember them. And it's another one that backs up my thing with my last book, The Country of Liverpool. The first 3 or 4 songs they say, we wrote these back then, let's have a go, are all country songs. And you could see them having fun. And I love the fact that it's still one of my favourite songs, One After 909. It's always been a great, great song. They resurrect that one. And of course that ends up on the album because it's a really good song. And that was one of the earliest ones that they'd written. So that was a nice glimpse. And as you say, it's that joy. And as a band, you've got to be seen to be having fun and feel you're having fun. And when they stopped having fun, that's when, at the end of the first episode, that's when things change, particularly between... and again, this is an interesting thing because it changes on screen between Paul and George a little bit. And then, of course, we get George walking out. Now, the way on screen that's developed is Paul is becoming sort of headmasterly, but he's talking to John and saying to John, no, could you just stop it just for a minute? We need to do this. Then you see George putting his guitar down and walking out, see you around the clubs. Whereas actually, what we know happened was, I don't think it was ever captured on film, but earlier that day, George had a big argument with John, which led to the walkout. But that's not portrayed on there. So that gives the impression it was almost like Paul and George had this thing, and George said, I'll play what you want me to play, or I won't play at all. And then Paul speaking to John, and then George walks out, and it just doesn't quite fit properly. But then you've got this big sense of drama. George walks out, goes back to Liverpool, and they can't get hold of him. And the thing that really surprised me was John and Paul talking, saying, well, if George is gone, should we get Eric? I thought, hang on, your first reaction should be, we've lost George. We're not the Beatles without George. How do we get him back? Now, of course, they eventually get round to that discussion. But you're thinking, so that little thing was a little bit strange for me.
Yeah, because I suppose in one sense, and they try to portray this in the film, don't they, with an image of a calendar and deadline dates approaching, and probably an element of that was, we've got a deadline in the diary here, and this is, we can't just push it aside. I wonder if they were just looking for a quick solution to get them to that deadline. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You do wonder why that was the first suggestion instead of let's go as Peter George and get him back in the band, But
then obviously you see them having their discussion, and eventually John Paul and Ringo decide they're going to go and see George, and the first one doesn't go well. But then at the beginning of the second episode, one of the most moving parts, which really I did not expect to see, George is not there. They're in the studio, and there's only Paul and Ringo, and Mal and Neil, the others are around. No sign of John. And so I was saying, anybody heard from John? Is he coming in? And Paul just says, and then there was two. But then you realise his eyes are moistening up. He's welling up. And suddenly he's thinking this is the end. Didn't expect to see that at all. And thought, in a way, he was the guy who was trying to hold everything together after Brian had died. And he can see it starting to crumble and to unravel a bit. And the camera just catches him with these moist eyes. And you think, that actually got to him.
It is a great series, isn't it, though, Dave? I mean, all in all, it is something that people have been waiting for a long time. It's been very well put together, albeit just a few little things that we mentioned at the start. Is this the definitive end of things that we're going to see on the Beatles?
If you look up definitive in the dictionary, it says, don't believe this, it will never be right. You'll never have a definitive because you still got an edited version. But for this whole period in the Beatles' time, I think on the whole, obviously you've got that bit right. You can see them when they move back into Savile Row. It's a much more intimate setting. They're happy. Obviously, George is back in. And I think for me, the best thing this has shown is particularly how John and Paul, and then with George and Ringo as well, develop songs. At one point you just got Paul slapping his bass, toying with this little melody. And after a minute or so, you think, hang on, let's get back. And then you see the song develop. Or Two of Us, which they're playing with all electric, and it still isn't working. And then it takes, I think, episode 3, say, let's try it with the acoustic guitars and no bass. And suddenly it just sounds absolutely perfect. So you've seen them where they're tweaking with lyrics, if lyrics don't fit. And that for me is finally understanding how they wrote their songs together. It wasn't just sort of, Paul, I've got 3/4 of a song. John, what do you reckon? John, finish it off. It's not like that at all. You've got the basics of it. But then you see them musically developing it. And then saying, those words don't fit. And then scribbling it out and changing it as it goes. That for me was the most important thing of seeing that transition of starting with very, very basic stuff and coming up with, yet again, some more incredible songs. And even, they're trying to decide where they're going to do the live show, if they're going to do the live show. And even the day before, when they finally said they were going to do the rooftop, they're still umming and ahhing whether they're actually going to do it or not. And then, of course, yeah, they do. And this obviously, it all builds up to this. This is what we're waiting for. Because we had that concert footage on the Let It Be film, the original film. But they've added in lots of lovely bits of talking to more people down on Savile Row. You get the Jobsworth policeman coming in. And that kind of decision. But I think the nice bit of how it ends up is with Billy Preston being brought in and realising he just popped in to see them. They've been friends since Hamburg. And he just fitted in so well. And I say, do you want to do the album with us? And he says, yeah. And then they have this discussion. What are we going to do? How do we pay him? Do we get him to join the band? Does he become the fifth Beatle? And he just fitted in so well. And they get this amazing concert at the end. So it's been brilliantly put together. So I'm off my soapbox now. I've had me little rant on the first bit, but I'll have to go through and watch it again a couple of times because there's so much in there.
Yeah. I think it is. It's that type of thing, isn't it, where you watch it once and then you go back, and actually when you watch it for the 4th or 5th time, you start seeing things that you didn't see on the first 3 times, and that's a great thing. So it's on Disney Plus, and it is definitely well worth a watch. and for hardened Beatles fans, it's gonna be the thing to watch and watch and watch again, and see all these little nuances along the way. It's good, isn't it, Dave?
Yeah, it's nice to see him do it. It's the biggest project, obviously, since Anthology, really. So if you've got all those together. And, you know, it's one I was having this conversation with a friend of mine. The Let It Be album is one that I rarely go back to play again. And so deliberately, I watched the Let It Be film, and then I played the Let It Be album and the Let It Be Naked version as well. Sort of forgetting there's some brilliant, brilliant stuff on there again. So it's rediscovering again. Now that I've seen how the songs came together, I'll listen to the album differently. So it's been a really good experience.
You're listening to Liddypod, Beatles banter with Bedford and Beesley.
Moving on, other news that has come about, and certainly people who are listening from within Liverpool might be aware of this already. People from outside the city may or may not be aware of it. And that's the whole issue of a statue for Brian Epstein has moved on quite a lot in the last month or so.
Well, it's great news because, you know, we've said for years, you know, if you've got a statue to the Beatles, fair enough. But there should be something for Brian, because we all know if it wasn't for Brian, the Beatles would not have got out of Liverpool. And so finally it's happening. And they've got Andy Edwards involved, who did the great 4 Beatles statues down at the pier head. So it'll be good. It'll be good to see. And now, you know, we've seen the maquette. We've now got the idea of what it's going to be like. And it looks like the funding is now coming together as well. So, yeah, really excited about it.
Yeah, and you've got to take your hat off, haven't you, to those people who've been, you know, battling away, working away, getting the funding over the years, who've done a really, really good job in making this come about. Because, you know, people think, oh, it's a statue, you just get the money together, you stick it up. But it's far more complex than that. And there's, there's a small group of people who have been working very hard to make this happen, hasn't it?
Yeah, and that's how these things happen. You know, just get some fans together and you think, right, I'm passionate about that. I want to do that. You know, like I was able to do with the Saving Ringo's Birthplace at Madryn Street. Got a little group together of us and we did that campaign. And so when fans do this and it catches on, you think, yeah, this is right. This is what it should happen. And yeah, Brian's been deserving of a statue for so long. And it's going to be really nice to see it. And for him to get that sort of recognition. Because, of course, again, referencing, I was going to say get back. It's a bit clumsy that then, doesn't it? Yeah. So we look at that, you know, one of the big things was when Brian died and they've got no manager. They're struggling. You know, what do they do? And they said, we're not going to have another manager. Though interestingly, just every now and again, there's little references to Alan Klein. And John's been having little meetings with Alan Klein while they're doing these get-back sessions. And, of course, that's what ends up with, you know, the eventual split. But Brian, even though they'd stopped touring, they still needed him to be the boss and just to give him some structure and say, right, this is what we're doing. Here's the list. You do that, you do that. Once Brian wasn't there, that caused all kinds of chaos. So even if maybe he felt by 67 he wasn't doing as much, he was still needed. And for me, it's always the biggest sadness is that, you know, maybe he would have prolonged the career of the Beatles, but he's never got to see the legacy, you know, because he should still be around now. And to see that, you know, 50 years after they've broken up, we're still talking about them. So the man deserves this. And yeah, hopefully it'll be another good tourist attraction as well. Get him the recognition he deserves. Yeah,
you're absolutely right, Dave. I mean, I mentioned there's a small group. The person I know involved is Marie Darwin, and she's been very involved from the very outset and has been tirelessly working at this. And it's going to be located, isn't it, in Whitechapel, near to where the NEMS building was. Sadly, that building is not there any longer. Another building that has gone. But it'll be nice because when Beatle fans come to Liverpool, If they work hard enough, they can find out where the Nems building was. But it's like a lot of places, and geography changes, and even though it's not that long ago the building disappeared, it's still hard now to remember what it was like. So to have the statue in that vicinity will be really good.
And it's nice then, you'll be able to recreate that first walk that Brian did. See, well, that's where his Nems store was. And you're literally just wandering round the corner and you're in Matthew Street. And that's what he was surprised at the first time he went to the cavern, how close it was. And it just adds nice, that little area. You can walk down bottom of Matthew Street, go past the White Star bulb, and you'll be there where Nems was. Go around the corner, you've got the old Hessies and the Rigby statue. Hang a left and you're back at Matthew Street. And it's a lovely little walk, that one. Just with some very significant little places.
Yeah, it is. And the thing that gets me, it's when you think about it, geographically, Nems and the Cavern Club are very close. In terms of culture, everything else, for Brian's point of view, that was well, it might as well have been on the other side of the world, really, but not that 2-minute walk.
Well, it was, yeah, because, of course, he was more inclined towards the classical music. So, going down to the cavern was not his thing. And when he first went, and because he was always immaculately dressed, he stood out. There'd be other people like in their office gear and stuff, but they tend to be... Brian was one of those people, I think he was born aged 30. He just always looked old. Yeah, he was only 32 when he died. He wasn't that much older than the Beatles. But yeah, I think that was his big surprise, was how close this little world was. And yet it was a world away for him. He knew nothing really of that little culture.
This is Liddypod, Beatles banter with Bedford and Beesley.
So Dave, we covered a lot of ground there. Get Back and the Brian Epstein statue. We'd love to hear from any of you that have watched Get Back. What your views are. Tell us. And what I'd love to hear, Dave, is not just people's views on it, but there's so much footage there. As we were saying before, there's going to be things you miss. Little nuances, little actions, little glances. If there's anything like that, let us know. Go to liddypool.com and let us know what your impressions of it was, what you got out of it, and anything that you think we've missed along the way. That'd be great to hear.
Yeah, exactly. And it's one of those, it's going to be discussed for a long time. And because there is so much over 6 hours, it is going to need a few views to look through it. But it'll raise other things, and people then have difference of opinion. Was that meant? Is that what they were getting at there? Is that where that started? And there's always going to be questions. And that's the beauty of it. That's why I don't think we'll ever get a definitive. Because a lot of it then is subjective. And that's how it should be. We should be able to say, well, here's the facts of this. That gets us that far. But unless we're actually inside their heads, we can never say exactly that's what they meant. Or I think we're sort of left with sort of a negative view of the Let It Be project. I think this is a better, even though it's a few negative points, I think there's a better, more positive, more upbeat feeling after watching this and thinking, actually, they could have kept going. You could see that musically when it worked. It was geniuses at work.
Now, Dave, one thing we need to do before we finish in Liddypod 23, we had a competition.
To name it Liddypod 24.
We'll remind people of what we were talking about in Liddypod 23 and the competition. We've got a winner.
Yeah, so it's talking about Bill Zygmunt's book that I've done with him, all his photographs. And we've had some great entries. Thank you so much for... of course it was Austin Reed's. That's where Bill first photographed the Beatles. So well done for listening to everybody. And we'll let the winner know exactly who they are. It won't be somebody with my surname. It's not a fix. It is a genuine thing, honest.
It's never a fix. Dave, lovely to speak to you as always. I hope you've enjoyed listening to Liddypod 24. And if you want to go back and listen to any of the previous Liddypods, liddypod.com is the place to go to. You'll find everything there, and give us your views on the Get Back series as well. Dave, good to speak to you.
Yep, we'll get back to some other Beatles stuff next. Oh no, it's that again, isn't it? Oh.
You've been listening to Liddypod, Beatles Banter with Bedford and Beesley.